Okay, in this video, we're going to do an example of how to actually go about using the polling data and the rules for the Republican nomination process in each state to try to make a prediction as to how many delegates each candidate will receive. So we're going to use Connecticut in this video. So first things first, I've made a template for you. You're going to take this template and literally copy and paste it into a document that you own, and then you're going to share that document with me. So I'm going to copy it, create a new document, and paste. And this is my template. So we're going to be working on Connecticut. So I'll put 6.3 Connecticut. All right. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to research and get the polling data available, which I've made very nicely available to you in this worksheet. So here's the polling data website. All right. And you can search lots of states on here, but what we're going to do is we're going to find any poll and we're going to type in Connecticut. And as you can see, Connecticut Republican presidential primary will pop right up. Now for Connecticut, there really aren't that many polls. As you can see, there's a Quinnipiac poll from October, an Emerson poll from November, and the latest poll, that is really only the latest poll that we have, is from April 10th and 11th. We have a very small sample size in this poll. This means 354 likely voters with a very large margin of error, 5.2%. And this is really the only poll that we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Command, Control, Shift, and F4 at the same time, which brings up this little crosshair. And I am going to snap, and I can insert my poll data right here. Okay, there's my poll data. Okay, which we will use in a minute. So now, total number of delegates. I'm going to need to read about the rules for slotting delegates in each state. So I'm going to click on the link for Connecticut, and pops up. They have 28 delegates available, and we're going to have to figure out how they are split up. So I have 28 delegates available. The types of delegates. Now, we've talked about the types of delegates in previous video, but we're going to read what kind of delegates they have. All right. So if I scroll down here, I get my rules. So 25 of Connecticut's 28 delegates to the Republican National Convention are pledged to presidential contenders in today's Connecticut presidential primary. In other words, that the delegates have to go to the convention and vote for who they are pledged to. So if we look, we have 15 district delegates. Okay, so we have 15 district delegates. So when I go back to my document, I can put in we have 15 district delegates. Okay, and we have 13 at-large delegates. So that's the number that we have. In fact, we got 10 base at-large delegates plus 0 bonus delegates plus 3 Republican National Committee delegates. So there are 13 at-large delegates. Okay. Now the rules to award delegates. I'm going to copy and paste them from this website, and then we're going to analyze them. So here are the rules. Okay. I'm going to copy and paste them, and then we're going to analyze them. Okay, so here are the rules. I find this font highlighting offensive, so I'm going to get rid of it. Okay, there we go. All right, so 15 district delegates are to be allocated to presidential contenders based on the primary results in each of the 5 congressional districts. Each congressional district is assigned 3 national convention delegates, and the presidential contender receiving the greatest number of votes in that district will receive all 3 of the district's national convention delegates. So I'm going to go to my polling data, and if we take a look at the polling data, it suggests very highly that Trump will win the overall election in Connecticut. Now, it doesn't say anything about the individual districts, but we're going to have to assume that, for now, that this distribution would be okay in the districts. Now, before we do that, though, we should definitely be using the margin of error in our prediction. So, using the latest Emerson poll, Trump is leading. Trump has 50% of the vote. And I forget the rest, but we're going to go back up. Kasich 26% and Cruz 17%. And Kasich has 17%. However, the poll has a margin of error of 5.2%. So, what are the possibilities? Well, Trump could be in a landslide, right? Trump could really be having 55% of the vote, okay? And Cruz and Kasich could eat up the other. They could decrease by 2.5% or something like that. That would kind of even out the 5% that we just gave to Trump. So something like 23%, and Kasich could have something like 15%. Or maybe Trump is not in the lead as much as we have. So maybe something like Trump has, well, maybe he only has 45% of the vote. And maybe Cruz really has 31% of the vote. And Kasich still maintains at 17%. So the idea is to come up with possibilities of what could actually be occurring according to this poll. So, based on the rules here, all right, there's no real reason to believe that Trump will not win these 15 delegates. So, even in a worst case scenario for Trump, it appears as though Trump will win the 15 delegates based on congressional districts. Now, we admit that we do not have any polling data on individual districts, because it could be such that in a particular district, for example, a very conservative district, may vote for Ted Cruz instead of Donald Trump. But we don't have that data to justify. So it seems like Trump is in a big enough lead here so that we could award the 15 delegates based on congressional districts. Now we're going to have to read the rest. 13 at-large delegates. If one candidate receives a majority of the statewide vote, more than 50%, that candidate is allocated all 13 of the at-large delegates. Well, right now, and this is what makes this sort of thing very interesting, I think. Right now, the Emerson poll is Trump at 50%, but there's a pretty big margin of error. Personally, I'm not comfortable predicting that Trump is going to win all 13 of those delegates. So I'm going to say right now, although Trump has 50% of the votes in the polling, due to the large margin of error of the poll, it is reasonable not to predict that Trump will actually get more than 50% of the vote. And this is what makes these predictions sort of interesting. So now we're going to keep reading. If no candidate receives a majority of the statewide vote, each presidential candidate receiving 20% or more of the statewide vote shall be allocated delegates accordingly based on their percentage of the vote of the candidates who meet the 20% threshold. Round fractional proportions to the nearest whole number. If rounding results in too few delegates being allocated, the candidate receiving the most delegates receives an additional candidate. So now this is interesting. So, based on this, we can use the polling data to predict delegates. So let's just say the poll was right. So Trump got 50%, which is not more than 50%. Okay? So he would get 50% of 13 of the votes. 50% of 13 is 0.5 times 13, which is 6.5, which rounds to 7. Okay. Now let's take a look at the rest of the rules. So we know that Cruz right now has 26% of the vote. Cruz is at 26%. 26% of 13, well, we're going to type that into our calculator. 26% of 13, or you could type it into Google, and you get 3.38. Okay? So we get 3.38 equals 3.38, and they said that we're going to round, and this is where the math comes in. You guys keep telling me there's no math in here, but that's nonsense. So we're going to round to the nearest whole number, so that's going to be 3 delegates. And then you might be wondering, Kasich. Well, Kasich right now is polling at 17%. Okay? He's polling at 17%, so he has not met the 20% threshold. But again, you know, he's close. And if you add up the percentages, we've got 50 and 26 is 76. 76 plus 17. 76 plus 17 does not quite get you to 100%. In fact, it gets you to about 93%. For me, I think it's safe to assume that we're going to let Kasich get 20% of the vote. And again, we're going to let Kasich get 20% due to the margin of error. And this would be a judgment call on your part. And this is where it can get interesting and you can make arguments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say he's going to get 20% of 13. And again, I'm making an assumption here. I'm making an assumption based on the fact that there are, if I add up 50, 26, and 17, that I'm not getting 100%, meaning there are like 7% of undecided voters. So 20% of 13, okay, is 2.6, which would round up to 3. And if I take a look, 7 plus 3 is 10 plus 3 is 13. So now I've made my prediction. So overall, my prediction for Connecticut is as follows. Trump got all 15 of the congressional votes plus 7 at large, so he gets 22. Cruz got 3 at large, so he gets 3, and Kasich is going to get 3 at large. And we'll have to see how so he's get 20. So Trump gets 22, 22 delegates. Okay, Cruz will get 0 plus 3 at large, gives him 3 delegates, and Kasich will get 0 plus 3 at large, which gives 3 delegates. So even though Donald Trump seems to be winning Connecticut mightily, he won't get all the delegates. And you're going to see this come out in other states. So now the idea is you're going to be doing this process, prediction-wise, for all the different states that we have coming up. Now again, this is a prediction. You may not agree with me that Kasich should get any votes predicted because he's not at the 20% threshold that Connecticut has for getting delegates. But that's okay. You make a prediction based on what you think, and you have to be able to justify it. That's the idea. Thanks, guys.